If you've ever wondered why good people seem to face the hardest struggles, you're not alone. Tonight, we're going to explore one of humanity's oldest questions through the gentle lens of Buddhist wisdom. But this isn't just about understanding, this is about healing. This is about discovering that every challenge you've faced has been preparing your soul for something beautiful. Welcome to Moonmine Temple, a sacred space where ancient wisdom meets modern healing. I'm here with you tonight, and whether you're seeking peaceful sleep, relief from life's burdens, or simply a moment of deep understanding, you've found your sanctuary. Many of us carry a quiet pain. We try to live with kindness. We help others without expecting anything back. We choose patience over anger. Yet somehow, life feels harder for us than for those who seem to care less. We watch people who lie and cheat succeed quickly, while our honest efforts meet obstacle after obstacle. We love deeply and get betrayed. We give generously and face loss. We remain faithful to our values and feel isolated in a world that seems to reward the opposite. Tonight, ancient Buddhist teachings will reveal why this happens, and more importantly, how these very struggles are transforming you into someone capable of receiving blessings beyond your imagination. Over the next 3 hours, we'll journey through 9 sacred tests that souls with good karma must pass before their true purpose unfolds. But first, let's create a foundation of peace together. Wherever you are right now, allow your body to settle. Feel the weight of your head against your pillow or the back of your chair. Notice how your shoulders can drop just a little lower. Let your breathing slow down naturally, like waves gently reaching the shore. Place one hand on your heart and feel its steady rhythm. This heart has been bruised by disappointment, yet it continues to beat with love. It has been broken by betrayal, yet it still chooses compassion. This heart of yours is not weak, it's incredibly brave. Tonight, we honor every tear it has shed, every kindness it has given, every moment it chose to stay soft in a hard world. The Buddha once said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Every struggle you've endured has been carving space in your soul for a deeper joy, a stronger peace, a more radiant love than you've ever known. The 9 tests we'll explore aren't punishments, they're initiations. They're how the universe prepares certain souls to become beacons of light for others. As we begin this sacred journey together, know that you don't need to believe anything I share. Simply let the words wash over you like warm water. Let your mind rest while your heart listens. Some of you will drift into peaceful sleep, and that's perfect. Others will stay awake and present, and that's perfect too. The healing happens either way. We're about to discover why your tender heart was chosen for this difficult but magnificent path. We'll understand why your struggles have meaning, why your patience will be rewarded, and why the very qualities that make life harder for you are actually preparing you for a destiny filled with purpose and peace. Take one more deep breath with me. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort and trust. Your healing begins now. Many of us know this feeling all too well. You live with genuine kindness, never intending harm, always trying to help when you can. Yet somehow, you become the target of whispers, blame, and doubt. You do the right thing, but people assume you're pretending. You help someone quietly, asking for nothing in return, only to discover rumors spreading about your motives. You choose silence to avoid conflict, but others interpret your peace as guilt. This is the first spiritual test that pure-hearted souls must face, the mirror of misunderstanding. And if you're experiencing this right now, feeling hurt and confused by how others see you, let me share an ancient story that might bring you comfort. In ancient China, there lived a humble tea merchant named Wei, who had discovered something extraordinary. Every morning before dawn, he would climb the misty mountains to gather leaves from wild tea plants that grew in hidden groves. These weren't ordinary tea leaves. They had been blessed by decades of mountain mist and untouched by human greed. Wei would carefully prepare this tea and offer it freely to anyone who passed his small roadside stall. The tea possessed a remarkable quality. One sip could ease the deepest anxiety, mend a broken heart, or bring clarity to a troubled mind. Word spread quickly through the villages about the miraculous tea that Wei gave away without charge. People began traveling from distant provinces just to experience this healing brew. Wei would greet each person with the same gentle smile, asking nothing about their troubles, simply offering them rest and his precious tea. As Wei's reputation grew, so did the jealousy of other merchants. They couldn't understand how he survived giving away his most valuable product. Surely, they whispered, he must be hiding something. Some claimed he was a con artist, that the tea was just ordinary leaves mixed with mind-altering herbs. Others insisted he must be secretly wealthy, playing at poverty to gain favor with powerful people. The suspicions grew darker. Perhaps he was a spy from a neighboring kingdom, or worse, practicing forbidden magic. One particularly bitter merchant named Master Chen decided to expose Wei's supposed deception. Chen was successful and respected, known throughout the region for his fine silk and jade. He couldn't bear that a simple tea merchant was receiving more honor than himself. Chen began spreading elaborate stories about Wei's true motives, claiming that anyone who drank the free tea would fall under Wei's mysterious influence. He warned that Wei was building an army of followers for some sinister purpose. The campaign of lies grew vicious. Chen convinced several other wealthy merchants to join him, and together they painted Wei as a dangerous charlatan who threatened the natural order of commerce. They said his generosity was unnatural, that no honest person would give away such valuable tea without hidden agenda. Slowly, fear began to replace gratitude in people's hearts. Villagers who had been healed by Wei's tea started avoiding his stall, afraid of being associated with someone so controversial. But the most heartbreaking betrayal came from an unexpected source. Among Wei's most frequent visitors was an elderly widow named Li, whose arthritis had been greatly eased by his tea. For months, she had been like a grandmother to Wei, bringing him simple meals and keeping him company during slow days. When Chen approached her with his poisonous theories, fear overtook her gratitude. She began to wonder, why would someone be so kind without wanting something in return? Her own son had abandoned her. Her neighbors ignored her suffering, yet this stranger offered daily healing. It did seem too good to be true. One morning, Li arrived at Wei's stall not for tea, but for confrontation. With tears in her eyes and fear in her voice, she accused him of manipulating her, of using her loneliness for his own mysterious purposes. She demanded to know what he really wanted, what scheme he was planning. Other villagers, emboldened by her courage, joined in the accusations. They surrounded Wei's stall, hurling suspicions and demanding explanations. Someone knocked over his carefully prepared tea, spilling the sacred brew into the dust. Wei watched it all in silence. His life's work pooling in the dirt, his reputation destroyed by fear and jealousy, people he had helped now viewing him as an enemy. When they finished their accusations and demanded his response, Wei simply bowed deeply to each person. Then he spoke, his voice gentle as mountain mist. "I have received your gift of showing me my attachment to being understood. Thank you for this teaching." The crowd expected anger, defensive explanations, or at least hurt feelings. Instead, they witnessed something that confused and unsettled them, genuine gratitude for their betrayal. Wei began cleaning up the spilled tea with the same care he had shown in preparing it. He gathered his few belongings and prepared to leave the village forever. As he walked away, he turned back once to bow again to the crowd, including Li and even the merchants who had orchestrated his downfall. Years later, Master Chen's business empire crumbled due to his own greed and dishonesty. The widow Li, now suffering worse than ever without Wei's healing tea, spent her final days wondering if she had destroyed the only person who had ever truly cared for her welfare. But Wei had vanished completely, some say returning to the mountains to serve the tea plants themselves. Others believe he continued his work in distant lands, still offering healing to strangers who might never understand his true heart. This story illuminates the deepest truth about being misunderstood by those we serve. Wei didn't defend himself because he understood something profound. People's misunderstanding of him was actually their own spiritual test, not his. His test was whether he could maintain pure motivation even when his purity was questioned. Their test was whether they could recognize authentic love when it appeared in their lives. In Buddhist wisdom, this is called the mirror teaching. When people misunderstand your kindness, they are often projecting their own fears and limitations onto you. Someone who has never experienced unconditional love will always suspect conditions. Someone whose own generosity comes with strings attached cannot imagine generosity without strings. Their accusations reveal their own inner landscape, not yours. The Buddha taught that attachment to being seen correctly is one of the subtlest forms of ego. We think we want recognition for noble reasons, to inspire others, to encourage more kindness in the world. But often, we're actually attached to the good feeling that comes from being appreciated. When Wei thanked his accusers, He was demonstrating true freedom, freedom from needing external validation for internal worth. Think about your own experiences with this painful test. Perhaps you've been the helpful coworker whose efforts were seen as manipulation. Maybe you're the family member whose sacrifices are taken for granted or viewed with suspicion. You might be the friend whose loyalty is questioned precisely because you're so loyal. In our modern world, authentic kindness often seems suspicious because it's become so rare. Social media has made this test even more challenging. We post about helping others and get accused of virtue signaling. We share our struggles and get told we're seeking attention. We remain private and get accused of being fake or hiding something. It seems impossible to win, and that's exactly the point. The game itself is rigged to teach us to stop playing. Let's practice healing this ancient wound together. Close your eyes gently and imagine yourself as Wei, standing in that village square surrounded by accusations. Feel the hurt of watching your gifts being rejected, your motives questioned by people you've served with love. Notice where this pain lives in your body, perhaps as tension in your chest, heat in your face, or heaviness in your stomach. Now breathe slowly and deeply, imagining Wei's remarkable response. Feel what it would be like to thank your accusers for showing you where you're still attached to being understood. This doesn't mean their accusations are true. It means their misunderstanding has revealed your own subtle need for appreciation. Breathe out the burden of proving yourself to anyone. Breathe in the freedom of knowing your own heart. The Buddha once said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased." This is a law, eternal. When you respond to misunderstanding with defensiveness, you create more misunderstanding. When you respond with gratitude for the teaching, you transform the entire dynamic. You become like Wei, someone so secure in their own purity that they can appreciate even betrayal as a spiritual gift. Feel your shoulders relaxing as you release the need to control others' perceptions of you. Notice how much energy you've been using to defend, explain, and prove yourself. All of that energy can now flow back into simply being who you are, kind, generous, authentic, whether anyone recognizes it or not. But here's the most beautiful part of Wei's story that many miss. By not defending himself, by accepting the misunderstanding with grace, he actually planted seeds of truth in every heart present that day. Years later, when people remembered his response, they began to question their own assumptions. His gratitude for betrayal was so unusual, so contrary to human nature, that it haunted them in the best possible way. Some eventually realized they had witnessed something holy and spent the rest of their lives seeking that same inner freedom. This is the secret power of passing the first test. When you stop needing to be understood, you become mysteriously magnetic to those who are ready for truth. When you release the burden of managing others' opinions, you gain the lightness to soar above the realm where opinions matter. You become like mountain mist, impossible to grasp, but touching everything with gentle blessing. As your breathing deepens and your body settles more completely, feel yourself embodying Wei's remarkable freedom. Imagine carrying his secret with you into tomorrow, the knowledge that your worth doesn't depend on anyone's recognition. Your love doesn't require anyone's understanding. Your purpose doesn't need anyone's approval. You are like the wild tea plants in the hidden groves, growing in your own perfect time, blessed by your own inner mist, offering your gifts simply because that's your nature. The first test is dissolving now, leaving you lighter and more spacious than before. When misunderstanding comes again, and it will, because you're walking a path of authentic love in a world that often fears authenticity, you'll remember Wei's bow of gratitude. You'll remember that their confusion is not your problem to solve. Their fear is not your responsibility to fix. Your only job is to keep offering your gifts with a heart as pure as mountain tea, whether anyone recognizes their value or not. The second test often arrives quietly, like morning fog settling into your bones. It's the peculiar ache of feeling fundamentally different from the world around you. You look at your friends, your family, your co-workers, and sometimes feel like you're speaking a different language entirely. They chase achievements, accumulate possessions, compete for status, while you find yourself drawn to deeper questions. They seem content with surface-level connections, while you long for conversations that touch the soul. They rush through life-consuming experiences, while you prefer to sit quietly and let life reveal its mysteries to you. This sacred solitude isn't the ordinary loneliness that comes from being rejected or excluded. It's the profound isolation that comes from seeing the world through different eyes. You haven't been cast out. You've grown beyond the comfortable boundaries that once contained you. And that growth, while beautiful, can feel devastatingly lonely. Let me share with you a story from the mountains of Tibet, where a young monk named Tenzin discovered the difference between being alone and being lonely. Tenzin had spent 3 years in a bustling monastery, surrounded by hundreds of fellow monks. He participated in every ceremony, joined every debate, shared every meal in the great hall, filled with laughter and spiritual discussion. By all appearances, he was thriving in this community of seekers. Yet each night, as he lay on his simple bed listening to the gentle snoring of his roommates, Tenzin felt a growing emptiness that no amount of companionship could fill. The other monks were content to follow the prescribed practices, to memorize ancient texts, to advance through the traditional stages of monastic life. But Tenzin found himself asking questions that made his teachers uncomfortable. Why do we chant these words if we don't truly feel their meaning? Why do we seek enlightenment as if it were a distant prize rather than recognizing it in this very moment? Why do we speak of compassion for all beings while competing with each other for the Master's approval? His sincere questions were met with gentle corrections. "You think too much, young Tenzin," the elder monks would say. "Follow the path that has been walked by thousands before you." But following felt like sleepwalking to Tenzin. He began to feel like an outsider, even among those who shared his spiritual calling. During group meditations, while others appeared peaceful and focused, Tenzin wrestled with a yearning he couldn't name. During communal meals, while others chatted about monastery politics and daily concerns, Tenzin found himself gazing out the window at the vast mountains, feeling called to something beyond the monastery walls. One morning, after a particularly restless night, Tenzin approached his teacher, Master Lobsang, with a request that shocked the entire community. He asked permission to leave the monastery for a solitary retreat in the high mountains. Not for a few weeks or months, but indefinitely. He wanted to sit alone with the vastness until he either found what he was seeking or understood why he felt so disconnected from the spiritual community he'd thought was his home. Master Lobsang studied his young student with knowing eyes. "You feel alone even when surrounded by your brothers," he observed. Tenzin nodded, tears gathering as he admitted this painful truth. "And you believe that physical solitude will cure this loneliness?" Again, Tenzin nodded, though with less certainty. "Very well," Master Lobsang said quietly. "But I have one condition. You must promise to return after 1 year and tell me what you've discovered about the difference between being alone and being lonely." Tenzin agreed eagerly, grateful that his teacher understood his need for this journey. The young monk climbed high into the Himalayas, far beyond the reach of human voices. He found a small cave overlooking an endless expanse of peaks and valleys, where the only sounds were wind and his own breathing. For the first time in years, Tenzin felt a deep relief. No more forced conversations about topics that felt shallow. No more pretending to find meaning in rituals that left him cold. No more smiling and nodding when his heart was crying out for something authentic. For several months, Tenzin reveled in his solitude. He meditated for hours without interruption, watched sunrises paint the mountains gold, and felt his spirit expanding like the vast sky above him. The loneliness he'd felt in the monastery began to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of connection, not to people, but to something much larger. He began to understand that his isolation in the monastery hadn't been about the other monks at all. It had been about his own resistance to accepting his unique spiritual path. But as winter deepened and the months stretched on, a different kind of loneliness emerged. This wasn't the painful disconnection he'd felt before. It was more like homesickness, but for a home he'd never known. Sitting in perfect silence under the star-filled sky, Tenzin began to feel the presence of all beings everywhere, suffering and seeking just as he was. He felt the monks in his old monastery struggling with their own questions they dared not voice. He felt people in distant cities aching for the peace he'd found in the mountains. He felt the profound interconnectedness of all life, and with it, a longing to share what he was discovering. As the year drew to a close, Tenzin realized that his solitude had taught him something unexpected. The loneliness he'd felt in the monastery hadn't been cured by being alone. It had been transformed by accepting his place in the vast web of existence. He wasn't isolated from life. He was connected to it in a way that transcended physical proximity to others. His different perspective wasn't a burden to hide or overcome. It was a gift he was meant to offer to the world. When Tenzin returned to the monastery, Master Lobsang immediately noticed the change in his student's presence. The young monk's eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, and his movements carried a quiet confidence that spoke of inner resolution. "Tell me," the master said, "what did you learn about being alone versus being lonely?" Tenzin smiled, with a warmth that seemed to light up the room. "Master, I learned that loneliness is feeling disconnected from life, while solitude is feeling connected to all of life. In the monastery, I was lonely because I was trying to force myself to be like everyone else. In the mountains, I was alone but not lonely, because I finally accepted who I am and why I see things differently. I discovered that my different perspective isn't a flaw, it's my contribution to the whole." Master Lobsang nodded slowly. "And now? Now I can be with others without losing myself, and I can be alone without feeling abandoned. I understand that some souls are meant to walk ahead of the crowd, not because they're better, but because someone needs to scout the path and report back what they find." This story reveals the profound truth about the second test faced by pure-hearted souls. The sacred solitude isn't a punishment, it's preparation. Those who feel different, who question what others accept, who seek depth in a surface world, are often the scouts of human consciousness. They're meant to venture into unexplored territories of the heart and spirit, then return with wisdom that can guide others. In Buddhist teaching, this is understood as the natural progression of awakening consciousness. The Buddha himself left his comfortable palace life, not because he was antisocial, but because his soul had outgrown the constraints of conventional living. He spent years in solitude, wrestling with the deepest questions of existence, before returning to share what he'd discovered. His loneliness in the palace transformed into meaningful solitude in the forest, which ultimately blossomed into profound connection with all beings. In our modern world, this test manifests in countless ways. You might be the person at parties who finds small talk exhausting while others seem energized by it. You could be the family member who questions traditions that everyone else follows blindly. Perhaps you're the friend who prefers deep conversations about life's meaning to discussions about celebrities and shopping. You might find yourself drawn to spiritual practices, philosophy, or creative pursuits that others dismiss as impractical or weird. The pain of this test often intensifies during holidays and social gatherings. While others seem genuinely excited about material gifts and surface celebrations, you find yourself longing for rituals that honor the sacred nature of existence. When friends bond over competition and gossip, you feel like you're watching from behind glass, wanting to connect, but unable to find common ground. This isn't because you're antisocial or superior, it's because your soul has different nutritional needs. Social media can make this test particularly challenging. Scrolling through feeds filled with carefully curated lives and shallow achievements can intensify the feeling of being fundamentally different. While others seem fulfilled by accumulating likes, followers, and material possessions, you find yourself yearning for experiences that can't be photographed or quantified. You want conversations that change people, moments that open hearts, connections that transcend the digital realm. But here's what Tenzin's story teaches us about transforming this test into a blessing. The goal isn't to eliminate the feeling of being different. It's to understand why you're different and how that difference serves the greater good. Your unique perspective isn't a cosmic mistake, it's a cosmic assignment. You're meant to see what others don't see, feel what others haven't felt, and eventually share what you've discovered with those who are ready to receive it. Let's practice embracing your sacred solitude right now. Place your hands gently on your chest and feel your heart beating with its own unique rhythm. This heart doesn't beat in sync with anyone else's, yet it's part of the grand symphony of all hearts everywhere. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine yourself as Tenzin in that mountain cave, finally free to be exactly who you are, without apology or explanation. Feel the relief of no longer trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. Breathe out the exhaustion of pretending to find fulfillment in things that leave you empty. Breathe in the spaciousness of accepting your unique spiritual fingerprint. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You only need to understand yourself and your purpose. The Buddha taught, better it is to live one day seeing the rise and fall of things than to live 100 years without ever seeing the rise and fall of things. Your different perspective allows you to see the rise and fall of things that others miss entirely. While they're caught up in the drama of the waves, you're learning to recognize the ocean itself. This isn't a burden, it's a superpower waiting to be claimed. Imagine now that your solitude is like Tenzin's mountain cave, not a place of exile, but a sanctuary where you can connect with the vast intelligence that flows through all existence. In this space, you're never truly alone because you're communing with the source of all life. Your different questions, your deeper longings, your resistance to surface living, these aren't flaws to fix, but treasures to cultivate. Feel your breathing becoming even deeper and more peaceful as you embrace this truth. The loneliness you've carried is transforming into something precious, the recognition that you're part of a much larger conversation than most people realize. You're connected to every seeker who has ever felt out of place in their time, every mystic who has chosen depth over popularity, every soul who has dared to question the unquestioned. Some of the most beautiful contributions to human consciousness have come from those who felt fundamentally different from their contemporaries. Artists who painted what others couldn't see, writers who articulated what others couldn't express, spiritual teachers who pointed toward truths that others couldn't perceive. Their initial loneliness was the price of admission to discovering gifts that would eventually bless countless lives. As you rest in this understanding, notice how your body is releasing the tension of trying to be someone you're not. Your shoulders are dropping, your jaw is softening, your breath is flowing more freely. This is what it feels like to come home to yourself, not the self that others expect you to be, but the self that you actually are. The self that sees beauty in simple moments, finds meaning in quiet experiences, and trusts the wisdom of your own unique path. The second test is revealing its hidden gift now. Your sacred solitude isn't isolating you from love, it's connecting you to a love so vast that it includes everything and everyone, even those who don't understand you yet. You're not alone in your differentness. You're part of an invisible community of souls who are helping humanity evolve to new levels of consciousness. Your questions are their questions. Your longings are their longings. Your search is their search. Feel yourself sinking deeper into peace as you realize that your path of sacred solitude is actually a path of profound service. By being true to your unique perspective, by honoring your different way of seeing, you're helping to expand what's possible for human consciousness. You're like Tenzin returning from the mountain, carrying wisdom that can only be gained through walking the path less traveled. Your differentness is not your burden, it's your gift to a world that desperately needs new ways of seeing, feeling, and being. Have you ever felt like life is playing a cruel joke on you? One by one, the things you've worked for, cared about, and depended upon begin slipping away like sand through your fingers. It might start small, a friendship that suddenly ends, a job that disappears without warning, an investment that evaporates overnight. But then the losses cascade, as if some invisible force has decided to strip away everything you thought was secure. Money vanishes through unexpected expenses or betrayals. Relationships that seemed solid crumble without explanation. Health issues emerge from nowhere. Dreams you've nurtured for years suddenly seem impossible to achieve. You find yourself asking the most painful question: why is this happening when I've tried so hard to live a good life? The losses feel random, cruel, and utterly unfair. You watch people who lie and cheat continue to prosper, while your honest efforts result in one setback after another. What if I told you that these losses aren't punishments at all, but the universe's way of preparing you for blessings so magnificent that you need to be completely empty to receive them? In a small mountain village in old Japan, there lived a potter named Kenji, whose ceramic bowls were considered the finest in all the land. Each piece he created was a masterwork, sought after by nobles and common people alike. Kenji had inherited his skills from 8 generations of potters, along with the ancient kiln that was the heart of his workshop. His shelves were lined with treasures, rare glazes passed down through centuries, tools crafted by master artisans, and pieces representing decades of perfected craft. Kenji lived simply but comfortably, supported by steady income and the deep satisfaction of creating beauty with his hands. He was known not just for his skill, but for his generous heart. When villagers couldn't afford his work, he would often give pieces away, saying that beauty belonged to everyone. When young people showed interest in pottery, he taught them freely, never hoarding his techniques. One autumn evening, as Kenji closed his workshop after a productive day, he noticed something troubling. His prized ancient kiln was making an unusual sound, a deep, ominous cracking that seemed to come from its very foundation. By morning, the sound had become a visible split running through the kiln's wall. Within days, the crack had spread so extensively that the kiln was no longer safe to use. Without the kiln, Kenji couldn't fire his pottery, and without fired pottery, he had no way to earn a living. The cost to rebuild was enormous, more than he had ever possessed at one time. He was forced to sell his most precious pieces, the glazes that had taken generations to perfect, and even his finest tools. But the money still wasn't enough. As winter approached, Kenji's situation grew desperate. His workshop, once filled with the promise of creation, now echoed with the hollowness of loss. Some nights, he would sit among the empty shelves, wondering if this was punishment for some unknown wrongdoing. Had he been prideful about his skills? Had he taken his good fortune for granted? But the losses weren't finished with Kenji yet. One harsh winter night, a fire broke out in the village, spreading from house to house with terrifying speed. Kenji's workshop, with its remaining tools and unsold pieces, was consumed entirely. He stood in the snow watching 8 generations of his family's legacy turn to ash, feeling as though his very identity was burning away with it. In the depths of this devastation, something unexpected happened. Old Master Yamamoto, a reclusive tea master who lived high in the mountains, appeared at what remained of Kenji's workshop. Yamamoto was legendary, a man who possessed wisdom that transcended ordinary understanding and rarely descended from his mountain retreat. "I have been watching your journey," Master Yamamoto said quietly, his breath visible in the cold air. "And I have a question for you. What were you really creating in this workshop? Pottery or attachment to pottery?" Kenji found himself speaking more honestly than he ever had before. "I thought I was creating beauty, Master, but perhaps I was creating chains that bound me to a single way of being in the world." Master Yamamoto nodded slowly. "The universe has a strange way of loving us. Sometimes it takes away everything we think we need, so we can discover what we actually need. Tell me, in all your years of creating pottery, when did you feel most alive?" Kenji thought for a long moment, then answered with surprise in his voice, "When I was teaching young people, Master. When I watched their faces light up the first time they successfully centered clay on the wheel. When I saw them discover that they could create something beautiful with their own hands." "And tell me," the master continued, "what do you need to teach someone to center clay and create beauty?" Kenji looked around at the ruins of his workshop, then back at his empty hands. Slowly, understanding began to dawn on his face. "Nothing," he whispered. "I need nothing but clay, water, and these hands. Everything else, the fancy tools, the perfect kiln, the workshop filled with treasures, those were luxuries, not necessities." Master Yamamoto smiled. "The fire didn't destroy your ability to create, Kenji. It destroyed your dependence on things that were never essential to your true gift. You were known as the finest potter in the region, but you were meant to be something even more valuable, a teacher who helps others discover their own creative power. The universe had to empty your hands completely so you could see what you were really meant to hold." Within weeks, Kenji began teaching pottery in the most basic way possible, with simple clay, a bucket of water, and his bare hands. He had no workshop, so he taught outdoors when weather permitted, and in borrowed spaces when it didn't. Word of his unconventional teaching style spread quickly. Students came not just to learn pottery, but to experience the profound peace that radiated from a man who had lost everything and discovered that he had lost nothing essential. Years later, Kenji's students established pottery studios throughout the region, each one carrying forward not just technical skills, but the deeper wisdom he embodied. His influence spread far beyond what he could have achieved in his original workshop, reaching hundreds of people who learned to create beauty with their own hands. The fire that had seemed to destroy his life had actually liberated his true purpose. This story reveals the profound mystery behind what appears to be random loss. What looks like devastation is actually precise surgery, removing everything that stands between you and your true purpose. The universe doesn't take away what you need, it takes away what you think you need, so you can discover what you actually need. In Buddhist understanding, this process is called the gift of emptiness. When our hands are full of things that don't serve our highest purpose, we can't receive what's meant for us. When our lives are cluttered with attachments that limit our growth, space is created by removing what no longer serves. It's like a gardener who must pull weeds so the plant can grow stronger and more beautiful. Think about the losses you've experienced in your own life. That relationship that ended just when you thought it was perfect, perhaps it was preventing you from meeting someone who could love the real you. The job you lost that seemed so unfair, maybe it was keeping you trapped in a role that didn't honor your true gifts. The money that disappeared through circumstances beyond your control, possibly it was attached to energies that weren't aligned with your soul's path. The Buddha taught that suffering often comes, not from what happens to us, but from our attachment to how we think things should be. When we cling desperately to circumstances, relationships, or possessions, we create our own suffering. But when we can hold things lightly, appreciating them while they're present, and releasing them when it's time to let go, we discover a peace that doesn't depend on external conditions. Let's practice this releasing together right now. Think of something you've lost that still causes you pain when you remember it. Feel where that loss lives in your body, perhaps as tension in your chest or heaviness in your stomach. Now breathe slowly and deeply, imagining yourself as Kenji watching his workshop burn. Feel the initial devastation, the sense that everything meaningful has been destroyed. But then imagine Master Yamamoto's gentle question: what were you really creating, the thing itself, or attachment to the thing? Allow yourself to consider that this loss might have freed you from something that was actually limiting your growth. Breathe out the grief of what you lost. Breathe in curiosity about what this loss might be making space for. Feel your hands opening, releasing the need to hold on to what's already gone. Notice how much energy you've been using to resist this loss, and feel that energy returning to you as you stop fighting what has already happened. The Buddha once said, "You only lose what you cling to." This doesn't mean we shouldn't care about people and things. It means we can love deeply without grasping desperately. We can appreciate beauty without needing to own it, enjoy experiences without needing to make them permanent, love people without needing to control their choices. As your breathing deepens and your body continues to relax, imagine that your losses have been like Kenji's fire, not destroying your essence, but revealing it. What if everything you've lost was actually clearing the way for something more aligned with your true nature? What if the universe has been preparing you for gifts that require empty hands to receive? What if your losses have been making you hollow in the most beautiful way, like a flute that can only make music because it's empty inside? Notice how your shoulders are dropping as you release the burden of protecting what was never meant to be permanent. Feel your jaw softening as you stop grinding against reality. Your breath is flowing more freely as you make peace with the natural cycles of gain and loss that govern all existence. You're discovering what Kenji learned, that sometimes the universe has to empty your hands completely so you can see what you were really meant to hold. The fourth test cuts deeper than any stranger's misunderstanding, hurts more than any material loss. This is the pain that arrives through the hands of those we love most, our children, our parents, our partners, our closest friends. These are the people for whom we would give anything, sacrifice everything, forgive endlessly. Yet somehow, they become the source of our deepest wounds. You might be the parent who gave everything to raise your children with love and wisdom, only to watch them choose paths that break your heart. Perhaps you're the adult child who honored your parents through every difficulty, yet they favor your sibling who rarely calls. Maybe you're the spouse who remained faithful through every challenge, only to discover betrayal where you expected loyalty. The cruel irony is that the depth of your pain directly reflects the purity of your love. Let me share with you a story from ancient China that illuminates why this test comes to those with the purest hearts. In the mountains near the old capital, there lived a merchant named Master Chen who had dedicated his entire life to his only son, Liang. Chen's wife had died in childbirth, leaving him to raise the boy alone while managing a successful tea trading business. Chen's love for his son was legendary in their region. He refused lucrative opportunities that would have required long travels, choosing instead to remain close to home so he could be present for every stage of Liang's development. As Liang grew into a young man, Chen began gradually transferring more responsibility to him, dreaming of the day when they would work as true partners. Everything Chen did, every sacrifice he made, every decision he weighed, was filtered through a single question: what would be best for Liang? But as Liang entered his 20s, something began to change. Liang started spending time with a group of younger merchants who operated with very different principles. They spoke of business as warfare, customers as targets to be conquered, and profit as the only measure of success. Gradually, Liang started implementing changes without consulting Chen, cutting corners that Chen had always maintained, pressuring customers that Chen had always treated with respect. When Chen tried to discuss these changes, Liang's responses grew increasingly harsh. "You've become an obstacle to progress, father," he said during one particularly painful conversation. "Your old-fashioned methods are holding us back. Maybe it's time for you to step aside and let someone with modern vision lead this business." Chen felt each word like a physical blow, not because of any concern for his own position, but because he could see his son transforming into someone he no longer recognized. The transformation accelerated when Liang secretly borrowed against the business to fund increasingly risky ventures with his new associates. When these investments failed catastrophically, Chen discovered that their family business was suddenly drowning in debt. Rather than take responsibility, Liang blamed his father's conservative influence. "If you had supported my vision instead of undermining it," he declared, "none of this would have happened." Chen sold everything he personally owned to save the business, giving up his comfortable home, his cherished possessions, even his late wife's jewelry to cover Liang's debts. Through it all, he never once reproached his son publicly or threatened to disinherit him. His love remained constant, even as his heart was breaking. But Liang's final betrayal was still to come. Humiliated by the business failure, he decided to leave town entirely. On the night before his departure, he came to his father not to seek forgiveness, but to demand his inheritance. "You owe me this," he said coldly. "Give me whatever money remains, so I can start fresh somewhere else." Chen looked at his son and saw a stranger. With tears flowing down his weathered face, Chen gave Liang the last of their money. As his son counted the coins without a word of thanks, Chen whispered, "I failed you, my son. Not by loving you too little, but by not teaching you how to love yourself." Liang left that night without looking back. For months, Chen wrestled with the most painful questions a parent can face. Where had he gone wrong? Had his love been too generous, too protective? One evening, as Chen sat in meditation, an old memory surfaced with startling clarity. He remembered his own father, a simple farmer whom Chen had once felt frustrated by, embarrassed by his lack of sophistication. Only years later had he come to appreciate the quiet wisdom his father had embodied. In that moment of remembering, Chen experienced a profound shift in understanding. Perhaps Liang's rejection wasn't a failure of love, but a necessary part of his son's journey toward discovering his own authentic path. Perhaps the values Chen had tried to teach couldn't be inherited like money, but had to be earned through personal experience and eventual awakening. Maybe his role as a father wasn't to prevent his son from making mistakes, but to love him unconditionally through whatever mistakes he needed to make. This realization brought Chen an unexpected peace. He began to see that his love for Liang had been pure and necessary, regardless of how it was received. Love given freely is never wasted, even when it appears to be rejected, because it becomes part of the recipient's story forever. Years passed, and Chen rebuilt his life on a smaller scale, creating a tea shop where people could find peace and simple wisdom. One autumn afternoon, nearly a decade later, Chen looked up to see a familiar figure in the doorway. His son had returned, but the arrogant young man who had left was gone, replaced by someone humbled by years of struggle. "Father," Liang said quietly, his voice breaking. Chen looked up calmly, feeling his heart expand with the same love that had never actually diminished. "Welcome home, my son," Chen replied simply. No explanations were demanded, no apologies required, as a condition of acceptance. Over tea, Liang shared his story of the intervening years, the failures that had taught him humility, the gradual recognition that everything his father had tried to teach him had been wisdom, not weakness. "I understand now," he said through tears. that you loved me not for what I accomplished, but for who I was. And I threw that gift away because I didn't understand its value." Chen smiled with infinite tenderness. "My son, love that can be thrown away was never really love. True love is like the sun. It continues to shine, whether or not we face toward it. Your rejection taught me to love you even more purely, without expectation or condition." This story reveals the profound mystery of the fourth test. The pain of betrayal by loved ones isn't punishment for loving too much. It's initiation into loving even more perfectly. When someone you love deeply hurts you profoundly, you're faced with the ultimate spiritual choice. Will you close your heart to protect yourself? Or will you learn to love without attachment to how that love is received? In Buddhist teaching, this is the transition from conditional love to unconditional love. Conditional love says, "I will love you if you behave in ways that please me." Unconditional love says, "I love you because love is my nature, not because of anything you do or don't do." This doesn't mean becoming a doormat. Chen didn't pursue his son or enable his destructive behavior. It means releasing the need for others to validate our love by reciprocating it perfectly. Let's practice this transformation together. Bring to mind someone you love who has disappointed you deeply. Feel the familiar ache in your chest, the mixture of love and pain their memory evokes. Now breathe slowly and deeply, imagining yourself as Chen in that moment of profound realization. Feel the shift from, "Why don't they love me the way I love them?" to, "How can I love them more freely?" Breathe out the need for them to be different than they are. Breathe in acceptance of their right to make their own choices, even choices that cause you pain. The Buddha taught that hatred is never appeased by hatred, but by non-hatred alone. This applies equally to disappointment and resentment. The more we demand recognition for our caring, the more we push others away. But when we release them from the obligation to return our love in specific ways, we create space for authentic connection to emerge naturally. Feel your breathing becoming deeper as you practice this release. Notice how much energy you've been using to try to control how others respond to your love. All of that energy can now flow back into simply loving, not because they deserve it, but because love is who you are. The fourth test is revealing its profound gift now. Through the pain of betrayal by those closest to you, you're discovering a love that can't be betrayed because it doesn't depend on reciprocation. You're learning to love like the divine loves, unconditionally, eternally, without expectation of return. This is the love that heals not just relationships, but the very fabric of existence itself. As we prepare to explore the fifth test, rest in the magnificent spaciousness of this unconditional love. You are no longer a victim of others' choices, because your happiness no longer depends on their choices. You are free to love as purely as Chen loved his son, through rejection and return, through every season of relationship, because love itself has become your refuge. Something strange happens to good people that rarely happens to others. You find yourself targeted by individuals who seem to take genuine pleasure in destroying what is beautiful, who view your kindness as weakness to exploit, who work systematically to undermine everything positive you try to create. These aren't simply misguided souls acting from their own pain. These are people who appear genuinely malicious, who seem energized by causing harm to those who threaten them with their very goodness. You recognize this in the co-worker who sabotages your projects out of pure envy, the neighbor who spreads vicious lies about your family for no apparent reason, or the person in your community who makes it their mission to tear down every positive initiative you support. What makes this particularly painful is that these individuals often appear successful, popular, even admired by others who don't see their true nature. Meanwhile, you, who harm no one and help many, find yourself under attack, wondering why the universe allows such injustice to flourish. The deepest wound comes from a question that haunts many pure-hearted souls. If there really is justice in the universe, why do evil people prosper while good people suffer? You watch those who lie, cheat, and manipulate climb ladders of success, while your honest efforts meet obstacle after obstacle. It's enough to make anyone question whether goodness is actually foolishness, whether integrity is just another word for naivety. High in the Korean mountains, there once lived a hermit monk named Jisan, who had spent 20 years cultivating a remarkable garden. This wasn't an ordinary garden, but a living meditation, each plant placed with intention, every stone positioned to create perfect harmony. Pilgrims would climb treacherous mountain paths just to sit in Jisan's garden for a few hours, finding healing for wounds they couldn't name and answers to questions they'd never been able to articulate. The garden had become legendary throughout the region. Mothers brought sick children there, and the children would leave with color returned to their cheeks. Scholars came with minds tangled by complex problems and departed with clarity. Broken-hearted lovers found peace there, warriors discovered gentleness, and the wealthy learned the value of simplicity. Jisan asked nothing of his visitors except that they treat the space with respect and leave something beautiful for those who would come after them. Word of the miraculous garden eventually reached Master Gokchin, a powerful monk who controlled several wealthy temples in the valleys below. Gokchin was known throughout Korea as a great teacher, but his greatness was built on carefully managed appearances rather than genuine wisdom. He surrounded himself with luxury while preaching simplicity, demanded tribute while teaching generosity, and used his position to accumulate power while speaking of humility. Most people never saw through his polished exterior, but Gokchin knew the truth about himself, and that knowledge made him deeply jealous of anyone whose goodness was authentic. When Gokchin heard about the healing garden and the simple hermit who had created it, something dark stirred in his heart. Here was a monk with no formal position, no wealthy supporters, no political connections, yet people traveled farther to see him than they did to visit Gokchin's elaborate temples. The very existence of Jisan's pure practice exposed the emptiness of Gokchin's elaborate charade. This could not be allowed to continue. Gokchin began his campaign subtly, as truly malicious people often do. He sent trusted disciples to spread rumors about the hermit, Perhaps Jisan was practicing dark magic. Perhaps he was accumulating secret wealth from his visitors. Perhaps his healing garden was actually a front for something sinister. When people asked for evidence, Gokchin's followers would say, "Why else would he live so far from proper oversight? What honest monk would refuse to submit to temple authority?" As the whispers spread, fewer pilgrims made the difficult journey to Jisan's garden. Those who did come often arrived with suspicious minds instead of open hearts, looking for signs of the corruption they'd been told to expect. The very atmosphere that had once radiated peace became tainted with doubt and fear. Jisan watched helplessly as something beautiful was being slowly poisoned by lies he had no way to combat. But Gokchin wasn't finished. He convinced the local authorities that an unauthorized hermit living without proper supervision posed a danger to public order. Official inspectors were sent to examine Jisan's simple dwelling and modest garden. Finding nothing inappropriate, they nevertheless issued warnings about unregulated spiritual practices and demanded that Jisan either join an established temple under proper authority or cease his activities entirely. The final blow came when Gokchin arranged for a group of his most fanatical followers to vandalize the garden during the night. They destroyed plants that had taken decades to mature, shattered stones that had been carefully positioned for maximum harmony, and scattered poison in the soil to ensure nothing beautiful could grow there again. In the morning, Jisan found 20 years of loving work reduced to chaos and ruin. A note was left behind. "This is what happens to those who practice false teachings outside proper authority." Standing among the destruction, Jisan felt something he had never experienced in all his years of practice, a rage so pure and focused that it seemed to burn through his entire being. For a moment, he understood completely why people sought revenge, why they fought fire with fire, why they abandoned gentleness when confronted with genuine evil. Every fiber of his being wanted to march down the mountain and expose Gokchin for what he truly was. The temptation to abandon his peaceful path and meet malice with malice was almost overwhelming. But in that moment of perfect fury, Jisan made a choice that would define not just his own spiritual destiny, but the destiny of countless souls who would later hear his story. Instead of descending into hatred, he sat down among the ruins of his garden and began to meditate. He breathed with the rage until it transformed into something else, not passive resignation, but active compassion for all beings trapped in cycles of suffering, including Gokchin himself. As Jisan sat in meditation, he began to understand something profound about the nature of evil and its relationship to good. Gokchin hadn't destroyed the garden because he was strong. He had destroyed it because he was terrified. The hermit's authentic practice had exposed the emptiness of Gokchin's carefully constructed image, threatening everything the corrupt monk had built his identity upon. Evil, Jisan realized, was often just fear wearing a mask of power. This understanding didn't minimize the real harm that had been done, nor did it excuse Gokchin's actions. But it revealed something crucial about this test that pure-hearted souls must face. When you encounter genuine malice, you're not just facing an external enemy, You're facing the ultimate test of whether your goodness depends on favorable conditions or whether it can maintain itself even in the presence of active opposition. Ji-san made an extraordinary decision. Instead of rebuilding his garden in the same location where it could be destroyed again, he would plant seeds of wisdom in the one place Gokchin could never reach, in the hearts of people who were ready to understand that true beauty comes not from external circumstances, but from internal cultivation. He began traveling from village to village, not to expose Gokchin's corruption, but to teach people how to create their own inner gardens that no external force could ever destroy. Years later, when Gokchin's inevitable downfall came through his own greed and corruption, people throughout the region had already learned a different way of living. They had discovered that the most powerful response to malice isn't revenge, but the creation of so much beauty and goodness that darkness can no longer find fertile ground in which to grow. Ji-san's destroyed garden had become thousands of inner gardens, each one more resilient than the original, because it was rooted not in favorable circumstances, but in unshakable understanding. This story reveals the profound purpose behind encountering people who seem genuinely evil. The universe isn't testing whether you're strong enough to defeat them. It's testing whether you're wise enough not to become them. The moment you respond to malice with malice, you've lost something precious, regardless of who wins the external battle. But when you can maintain your goodness, even in the presence of active opposition, you become a force for transformation that no darkness can overcome. In Buddhist understanding, this is called the diamond path, a way of being that becomes stronger under pressure rather than weaker. The Buddha himself faced this test when Mara, the embodiment of temptation and evil, tried repeatedly to turn him from his path. Each time, the Buddha's response was not to fight Mara, but to acknowledge his presence with compassion and continue walking toward enlightenment. This demonstrated something powerful, that evil can only maintain itself in the presence of reactive opposition. Think about your own encounters with this test. Perhaps you've faced workplace bullying from someone threatened by your competence, family sabotage from relatives, jealous of your happiness, or community opposition from those who profit from the very problems you're trying to solve. The natural human response is to fight back, to expose their tactics, to protect yourself by becoming harder and more defensive. But this test is asking you to find a third option, one that neither submits to evil nor becomes evil in response to it. Let's practice this diamond-like strength together. Bring to mind someone who has actively opposed your goodness, someone whose malice has caused you real harm. Feel the familiar anger, the justified outrage, the desire for them to face consequences for their actions. Now breathe slowly and deeply, imagining yourself as Ji-san sitting among the ruins of his garden. Feel the choice point between revenge and transformation. Breathe out the need to make them pay for what they've done. Breathe in the recognition that your goodness doesn't depend on their badness being punished. Your light doesn't need their darkness to be extinguished in order to shine. The Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. When you maintain your compassion in the face of malice, you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for yourself, and for all the people your example will inspire. You're proving that goodness is stronger than evil, not because it can defeat evil in battle, but because it can remain good even when evil does its worst. Feel your body relaxing as you release the burden of fighting darkness with darkness. Notice how much energy you've been using to resist, oppose, and defend against malicious people. All of that energy can now flow into creating beauty, spreading kindness, and building the kind of world you want to live in. Like Jisan discovering that his destroyed garden had become the seed for thousands of inner gardens, you're learning that every act of maintaining goodness in the face of evil plants, seeds that will bloom in ways you may never see. You're not learning to be weak in the face of evil. You're learning to be strong in a way that evil cannot comprehend or defeat. Your goodness is becoming diamond-like, unbreakable not because it's hard, but because it's so clear and pure that opposition passes right through it without leaving a mark. You are becoming living proof that love is stronger than hate, that truth is more powerful than lies, that light shines brightest when surrounded by darkness. You no longer need evil people to be good in order for you to be good. You no longer need the world to be fair in order for you to be loving. You have found the source of goodness within yourself, and no external force can touch it. The sixth test often feels like the cruelest joke the universe can play on a sincere heart. You've worked diligently, lived righteously, made sacrifices that others wouldn't even consider, yet success seems to dance just beyond your reach like a mirage in the desert. You watch people who cut corners, manipulate systems, and step on others, climb quickly to heights that you've been struggling toward for years. Meanwhile, your honest efforts yield modest results, your integrity costs you opportunities, and your patience is tested by what feels like cosmic indifference to your worthiness. This isn't about wanting wealth or fame for selfish reasons. Often, those facing this test simply want stability, peace, the ability to help their families, or contribute meaningfully to their communities. Yet even these humble desires seem impossibly delayed, while others who seem less deserving receive abundance effortlessly. You begin to wonder if virtue is actually a handicap in a world that rewards the ruthless and clever rather than the good and patient. Let me share with you a story from ancient Tibet that reveals why this test comes to souls who are being prepared for something far greater than ordinary success. In a remote valley of the Himalayas, there lived a farmer named Tenzin, whose fields consistently failed despite his tireless efforts. Each spring, he would plant his barley with meticulous care, offering prayers to the mountain spirits and working from dawn until dusk to tend his crops. Yet year after year, something would go wrong: early frost, unexpected drought, or insect plagues that seemed to target only his fields while leaving his neighbors' crops untouched. His family grew thinner each winter, while others in the village prospered from their harvests. What made Tenzin's situation particularly painful was that his neighbor, Norbu, seemed to succeed effortlessly despite putting in half the effort. Norbu would plant his seeds carelessly, tend his fields sporadically, and spend most of his time drinking chang with friends in the village tea house. Yet Norbu's harvests were always abundant, his family well fed, his barns overflowing with surplus grain that he could sell for handsome profits. The contrast was so stark that people began to whisper about Tenzin being cursed or somehow disfavored by the gods. Tenzin's wife, Dolma, grew increasingly bitter as the years passed. "Why do we keep trying?" she would ask during their meager winter meals. "Maybe we should move to the city, find some other way to live. This land doesn't want us here." Their children, seeing other families enjoy abundance while they struggled with scarcity, began to question whether their father's dedication was wisdom or foolishness. But Tenzin found himself unable to abandon the land, drawn by something deeper than logical calculation. Each morning, despite the previous day's disappointments, he would wake before dawn and walk to his fields with the same careful attention his grandfather had taught him. He would examine each plant individually, speak softly to the soil, and offer gratitude even for the smallest signs of growth. His relationship with the land wasn't based on what it gave him, but on something he couldn't fully explain, a sense that he was meant to be there, learning something that couldn't be learned anywhere else. One particularly difficult autumn, after a hailstorm had destroyed yet another promising crop, Tenzin sat alone in his ruined field as the sun set behind the mountains. His family's food stores were nearly empty, winter was approaching, and he had no harvest to sell for the basic supplies they would need to survive. For the first time in his adult life, Tenzin felt his faith wavering. He looked across the valley at Norbu's perfect fields, golden with healthy grain, and wondered if his lifelong dedication had been a profound mistake. As darkness fell, Tenzin noticed an old man approaching across the field, someone he had never seen before, walking with a staff and wearing the simple robes of a wandering monk. The stranger sat down beside Tenzin without invitation and gazed out at the devastated crops. "Difficult season," the old man observed quietly. "Tell me, young farmer, what do you think you're really growing here?" Tenzin looked at him with exhausted confusion. "Growing? I'm not growing anything. Everything dies before harvest. 20 years of work, and I have nothing to show for it." The old monk nodded thoughtfully. "Nothing to show for it? That's interesting. Tell me about your relationship with this land." Despite himself, Tenzin found himself describing his daily rituals, his attention to each plant, his patience with soil that seemed determined to disappoint him. He spoke of mornings when he would sit quietly among his struggling crops, feeling connected to something larger than success or failure. He described the peace he found in the work itself, separate from any results it might yield. As he talked, the old monk's eyes began to gleam with understanding. "Ah," the monk said softly, "now I see what you're really growing. You're not growing barley, young man. You're growing patience. You're growing faith that doesn't depend on external rewards. You're growing the ability to love something without needing it to love you back in the way you expect. These are crops that take much longer to mature than grain, but they feed the soul for lifetimes." The monk gestured toward Norbu's successful fields. "Your neighbor over there is growing barley very successfully. But what is he growing in his character? What is he cultivating in his spirit? His easy success has taught him nothing about perseverance, nothing about faith, nothing about finding meaning in effort itself rather than only in results. He's wealthy in grain but poor in the qualities that matter for the soul's development. Tenzin stared at the old man in amazement. Are you saying my failures have been successes? The monk smiled gently. I'm saying that different souls are given different curricula. Some people need to learn through easy abundance, though that's actually the more difficult path because it rarely teaches wisdom. Others, like you, are enrolled in the advanced course of learning to find fulfillment independent of external validation. Which lesson do you think will serve you better in the long run? As if to demonstrate his point, the monk gestured to the night sky, where countless stars were becoming visible. Do you think those stars are failures because they don't shine as brightly as the sun? Or do you recognize that they have their own perfect timing, their own unique purpose in the cosmic order? Tenzin looked up and felt something shift in his understanding. He had been comparing his dim starlight to others' blazing suns, not recognizing that each had their place in the vast design. The monk continued, in 3 years' time, there will be a great famine in this region. Those who have grown dependent on easy success will panic and despair. But you, who have learned to find peace even in scarcity, who have developed patience and faith independent of circumstances, you will be like a mountain that remains steady while storms rage around it. Your neighbors will come to you not for grain, but for the wisdom that only comes from learning to be content with little. When Tenzin looked around to respond, the old monk had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. But the conversation had planted something new in Tenzin's understanding. He began to see his years of struggle not as evidence of cosmic indifference, but as a specialized education in qualities that couldn't be learned through easy success. His delayed harvest wasn't punishment, it was preparation for a role he hadn't yet imagined. 3 years later, exactly as the mysterious monk had predicted, a severe drought devastated the entire region. Norbu, who had never learned to manage scarcity or find peace in difficult circumstances, fell into despair and eventually abandoned his land. But Tenzin, drawing on years of practice in finding contentment with little, not only survived the famine, but became a source of strength and wisdom for his entire community. People sought him out not for material resources, but for his remarkable ability to maintain hope and find meaning even in the darkest circumstances. This story illuminates the profound mystery of the sixth test. What appears to be delayed success is actually perfectly timed preparation. The universe isn't withholding rewards from you arbitrarily. It's ensuring that when your blessings arrive, you'll have the wisdom and character necessary to handle them well and use them to serve others. Easy success often creates shallow people, while delayed success grows deep souls. In Buddhist understanding, this is called the ripening of karma. Just as different fruits ripen at different times depending on their nature, different souls receive their rewards according to divine timing, rather than human impatience. A mango that ripens too early is bitter and inedible. A soul that receives success before developing the character to handle it often becomes corrupted by that very success. Think about your own experience with this test. Perhaps you've watched less qualified people receive promotions you deserved, seen less caring parents blessed with easier children, or observed less generous people enjoying greater abundance. The pain of these comparisons is real and understandable. But what if your delayed success is actually evidence of your soul's advanced curriculum rather than cosmic neglect? Let's practice embracing this deeper understanding together. Close your eyes and think of an area where you feel your efforts haven't received appropriate recognition or reward. Feel the familiar frustration, the sense of unfairness, the temptation to give up or compromise your standards. Now breathe slowly and deeply, imagining yourself as Tenzin, sitting in his failed field with the wise monk. Ask yourself, what am I really growing through this experience? Perhaps you're growing patience that will serve you in future challenges. Maybe you're developing compassion for others who struggle while watching others succeed easily. You could be learning to find fulfillment in the work itself, rather than only in external validation. Breathe out the need for immediate results. Breathe in trust in perfect timing that you may not yet understand. The Buddha taught that comparison is the root of all suffering. When you measure your timeline against others, you're assuming that everyone should ripen at the same rate. But different souls have different destinies, different lessons to learn, different gifts to develop. Your delayed success isn't evidence of your unworthiness, it's evidence of your potential for something greater than ordinary achievement. Feel your breathing becoming deeper as you release the burden of keeping score with the universe. Notice how much energy you've been using to resist your own perfect timing. All of that energy can now flow into appreciating the unique education you're receiving, the specialized training that only comes through patient perseverance. Like Tenzin discovering that he was growing wisdom rather than barley, you're recognizing that your greatest harvest may be invisible to others, but invaluable to your soul's development. The sixth test is revealing its hidden blessing now. Your delayed success is creating within you something far more precious than quick achievement, the unshakable peace of someone whose happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances. When your blessings finally arrive, they'll find you prepared not just to receive them gracefully, but to use them wisely in service of something larger than yourself. You are becoming like the stars that the monk pointed to, not competing with the sun's brightness, but adding your own unique light to the perfect cosmic design. As we prepare to explore the seventh test, rest in this understanding of divine timing. Your season is coming, your harvest is growing, your preparation is nearly complete. Trust the process that has been strengthening you in ways you're only beginning to understand. One morning you wake up and everything looks exactly the same, but something fundamental has shifted inside you. The activities that once brought joy now feel empty as hollow shells. The goals you've been pursuing suddenly seem pointless, like chasing mirages in a desert. You find yourself going through the motions of living while feeling like you're watching your life from behind thick glass, present, but somehow not really there. This isn't depression in the clinical sense, though it may feel disturbingly similar. Your basic functions continue, your responsibilities get met, but the spark that once animated your days has dimmed to barely a flicker. You look at other people who seem energized by their pursuits and wonder what's fundamentally wrong with you. Why don't you care about the things you used to care about? Why does everything feel so profoundly meaningless? This disorientation often hits people who have been walking a spiritual path for some time. You've learned to let go of superficial attachments, developed compassion and patience, made peace with life's difficulties. But suddenly, even your spiritual practices feel hollow and mechanical. Meditation brings no peace. Prayer feels like talking to an empty sky, and the wisdom that once comforted you now sounds like empty platitudes echoing in a vacant cathedral. You begin to wonder if you've lost your way entirely, if all your growth has been an elaborate self-deception. Deep in the forests of Mount Furano in ancient Japan, there lived a monk named Izan, who had devoted 15 years to rigorous spiritual practice. He followed every teaching perfectly, meditated for hours each day, studied sacred texts until he could recite them from memory. His abbots praised his progress, visiting pilgrims sought his wisdom, and Izan himself felt satisfied with the steady advancement of his spiritual understanding. He was, by all external measures, a model monk, approaching the heights of realization. But one spring morning, everything changed without warning or explanation. Izan woke up and felt absolutely nothing. The bell that called monks to morning meditation, which had always filled him with peaceful anticipation, now sounded hollow and mechanical. The ancient prayers that had once lifted his spirit felt like meaningless syllables falling from his lips, like dead leaves. The meditation cushion where he had found such profound insights now seemed like just a piece of fabric stuffed with straw. Days passed, then weeks, and the emptiness only deepened, like a well that had no bottom. Izan tried harder, thinking perhaps he had become lazy or unfocused. He extended his meditation sessions, fasted more rigorously, studied even more intensively. But the harder he tried to recapture his former enthusiasm, the more distant it became. It was as if he was trying to grasp water with his bare hands. The tighter he squeezed, the more it slipped away. The other monks began to notice his struggle with growing concern. Some offered well-meaning advice, suggesting different practices or pointing to texts that might rekindle his passion. Others whispered that perhaps Izan was experiencing a crisis of faith, that his apparent progress had been superficial all along. The abbots called him in for concerned discussions, asking if he was questioning the teachings or if personal problems were distracting him from his practice. But Izan couldn't explain what was happening because he didn't understand it himself. His faith hadn't wavered. He still believed in the teachings intellectually. He had no personal crises or external distractions pulling at his attention. He simply felt as though he had become a ghost haunting his own life, going through familiar motions that no longer connected him to anything real or meaningful. The very practices that had once been his greatest joy now felt like elaborate performances with no audience and no purpose. Months passed in this grey twilight of the spirit. Zen began to wonder if this was punishment for some spiritual pride he hadn't recognized, or if he had simply reached the limits of his capacity for growth. He considered leaving the monastery entirely, thinking that perhaps monastic life was no longer his authentic path. But something prevented him from making such a drastic change. Not hope exactly, but a strange sense that this emptiness itself was somehow important, though he couldn't understand why. One misty morning, as Zen sat in the meditation hall feeling more disconnected than ever, an elderly visiting master named Kogen approached him after the session. Kogen was legendary throughout Japan as a teacher who had guided many students through the deepest mysteries of awakening. He rarely spoke to individual monks, preferring to teach through silent example rather than words. But something in Zen's demeanor had caught his attention like a bell ringing in the distance. "Young monk," Kogen said quietly, "you look like someone who has lost something precious. Tell me, what are you grieving?" Zen was startled by the accuracy of the observation. "Master, I don't know what I've lost, but everything feels empty. My practice, my understanding, my sense of purpose, it's all vanished, like morning mist. I feel like I'm dying spiritually, but I can't understand why or how to stop it." Kogen nodded with a knowing smile that seemed to contain infinite compassion. "Ah, you're not dying, my friend. You're being born. But you're trying to be born while clinging to your old shell, which is why it feels so uncomfortable and confusing." He gestured to a tree outside the window where a cicada shell clung to the bark, empty and transparent. "Do you think that cicada mourned the loss of its larval form when it was ready to emerge as a flying creature?" Zen looked confused and slightly frustrated. "Master, I don't understand. How can losing my connection to spiritual practice be a sign of progress rather than regression?" Kogen settled beside him with the infinite patience of someone who had guided many souls through this particular passage. "Tell me, what were you seeking when you first began practicing seriously?" "Peace, wisdom, understanding," Zen replied immediately, as if reciting from memory. "I wanted to transcend suffering and find lasting happiness through spiritual realization." Kogen nodded thoughtfully. "And did you find these things through your practices over the years?" "Yes, for many years. That's exactly what makes this emptiness so frightening. I had found what I was looking for, and now it's gone completely." "But had you really found it?" Kogen asked gently. "Or had you found beautiful spiritual experiences that you mistook for the real thing?" The question hit Zen like a bell ringing directly in his chest. He began to realize that much of what he had called spiritual progress had actually been sophisticated spiritual experiences, feelings of peace, insights about truth, states of consciousness that came and went like weather patterns. He had been collecting spiritual achievements like trophies, measuring his progress by the intensity and frequency of these experiences. "You see," Kogen continued with infinite gentleness, "true awakening isn't an experience you can have or lose. It's not a state you can enter or exit like a room. It's the recognition of what you always already are, prior to any experience whatsoever. But as long as you're fascinated by spiritual experiences, you can't see past them to the awareness that makes all experiences possible. Your practices have been like looking at your finger instead of the moon it's pointing toward. Zen felt a strange mixture of relief and vertigo, like standing at the edge of a vast canyon. So this emptiness I'm feeling is the natural result of your readiness to stop being satisfied with spiritual entertainment and discover what you actually are. The old form of seeking has died because you've outgrown it completely. But you haven't yet recognized what remains when all seeking stops. Kogan stood to leave, but turned back with one final instruction that seemed to turn everything upside down. Stop trying to get your spiritual feelings back. Stop trying to make sense of this transition. Just sit in the emptiness without trying to fill it, and see what's there when you're not looking for anything at all. With that, he walked away, leaving Zen alone with the most paradoxical instruction he had ever received. For weeks, Zen experimented with simply being empty, without trying to fix or understand his condition. Instead of meditating to achieve some particular state, he just sat with whatever was present, including the apparent absence of anything meaningful. Instead of studying to gain insight, he let himself not know anything. Instead of trying to feel spiritual, he allowed himself to feel completely ordinary and unremarkable. Gradually, something extraordinary began to emerge from this ordinariness. Zen started to notice that even in his emptiness, something was aware of the emptiness. Even in his meaninglessness, something was present to witness the meaninglessness. This witnessing awareness wasn't an experience that came and went. It was the constant backdrop against which all experiences appeared and disappeared, like clouds in an endless sky. It had no qualities, no spiritual flavor, no impressive characteristics. It was just mysteriously, undeniably present. The recognition, when it came, was so simple that Zen almost missed it entirely. He was sitting in the garden, feeling his usual spiritual emptiness, when he suddenly realized that this aware presence he had been overlooking was what he had been seeking all along. It wasn't hidden behind his experiences. It was the very thing having all experiences. It wasn't something he could achieve through practice. It was what was practicing. It wasn't a reward for spiritual effort. It was the effortless ground of all existence. This awareness didn't bring back his old spiritual enthusiasm. Instead, it revealed that he no longer needed spiritual experiences to feel complete. He could appreciate them when they arose, but he didn't depend on them for his sense of well-being. He had discovered something far more reliable than any spiritual state, the unshakable presence that remained constant through every possible experience, including the experience of spiritual emptiness. If you're experiencing this profound disorientation right now, feeling spiritually empty or disconnected from practices that once nourished you, consider that this might be graduation rather than failure. The emptiness you're feeling could be space opening up for something beyond experience, the simple recognition of what you are when you're not trying to be anything special. Let's practice resting in this groundless ground together. Close your eyes and notice whatever's present right now: boredom, emptiness, confusion, or anything else. Instead of trying to change or understand these experiences, simply notice what's aware of them. This awareness isn't dramatic or exciting. It's more like the silence between sounds, the space between thoughts. Don't try to grasp this awareness or turn it into a spiritual experience. Just let yourself be it, the way you let yourself be breathing without thinking about it. Feel how this aware presence needs nothing, seeks nothing, lacks nothing whatsoever. It's completely fulfilled, just being what it is, which is what you are when you're not trying to be anything else. By dissolving your attachment to spiritual experiences, this phase is pointing you toward what you actually are beyond all experience. You're discovering that you don't need to feel spiritual to be whole, don't need meaningful experiences to be complete. Like Zen, finding the awareness that was present even in emptiness, you're recognizing the unshakable foundation that remains constant through every possible experience of life. You have found what was never lost, arrived where you never left, and become what you always already were. Something haunting happens when you think you've finally learned your lessons. You find yourself in a situation that feels disturbingly familiar, like walking into a room you swore you'd never enter again. The details might be different, the people involved may have changed, but the essential pattern is unmistakably the same. You're attracted to the same type of person who ultimately disappoints you. You find yourself in a new job with the same toxic dynamics you left behind. You move to a different place only to recreate the same problems you were desperately trying to escape. At first, you might blame it on bad luck or cosmic coincidence. Surely the universe isn't cruel enough to keep putting you through identical lessons over and over again. But as the pattern repeats with increasing clarity, a more unsettling possibility emerges. Perhaps this isn't happening to you, but through you. Perhaps you're unconsciously creating these situations because there's something you haven't fully learned, some aspect of yourself you haven't fully faced. This realization can be devastating for souls who have worked hard on their personal growth. You've read the books, done the therapy, practiced meditation, forgiven those who hurt you. You thought you had transcended these old patterns, healed these ancient wounds, evolved beyond these limiting beliefs. Yet here you are again, feeling like you're trapped in an endless loop of the same painful dynamics, wondering if all your progress has been an elaborate illusion. In the high mountain passes between Tibet and Nepal, there lived a merchant named Sonam who had built a successful business trading precious stones and rare medicinal herbs. Sonam was known throughout the region for his sharp mind and even sharper bargaining skills, able to extract maximum profit from every transaction. But despite his commercial success, Sonam's personal life was marked by a troubling pattern that had followed him since childhood, like a persistent shadow. Every partnership Sonam entered, whether in business or friendship, would begin with great promise and mutual respect. He would find someone whose skills complemented his own, someone he genuinely liked and trusted. But inevitably, conflicts would arise over money, decisions, or recognition. Sonam would find himself feeling unappreciated, taken advantage of, or unfairly criticized. The relationship would deteriorate into bitter arguments, broken agreements, and eventual separation. Each time, Sonam was convinced that he had simply chosen the wrong partner, that the next person would surely be different. This pattern had repeated itself so many times that Sonam's reputation began to suffer throughout the trading communities. Potential partners would hear whispers about his previous failed relationships and decide to avoid working with him entirely. Business associates would warn each other about Sonam's tendency to become difficult and demanding when things didn't go his way. Slowly, the merchant who had once been welcomed in trading posts throughout the mountains found himself increasingly isolated and mistrusted. Frustrated and confused, Sonam decided that the problem must be the region itself. Perhaps the altitude affected people's judgment, or maybe the local culture was incompatible with his business style. He sold his trading post and moved to the lower valleys near the Indian border, convinced that a fresh start in a new place would allow him to escape the pattern of failed partnerships that had plagued him in the mountains. He felt confident that distance from his old reputation would give him the opportunity to apply everything he had learned from his previous mistakes. For several months, Sonam's strategy seemed to work perfectly. He established himself in a bustling market town where no one knew his history. He found a promising partner named Karma, a local trader who seemed honest, capable, and eager to work together. Their initial ventures were successful, their working relationship harmonious, and Sonam congratulated himself on having finally learned how to choose the right people. But gradually, like water seeping through the smallest cracks, familiar tensions began to emerge. Sonam started to feel that Karma wasn't appreciating the full value of his contributions. Small disagreements about business decisions began to feel like personal attacks on his judgment and competence. When customers praised Karma's local knowledge, Sonam heard it as dismissal of his own expertise. The same jealousies, resentments, and power struggles that had destroyed his previous partnerships began to resurface, despite his best intentions to behave differently. Within a year, Sonam found himself in another bitter conflict with another failed partner, surrounded by the same whispers and warnings that had driven him from the mountains. The geographical change had solved absolutely nothing. If anything, the repetition of the pattern in a completely new environment made it impossible to blame external circumstances. Sonam was forced to confront the possibility that he was the common denominator in all these failed relationships. One evening, as Sonam sat alone in his small quarters feeling defeated and confused, an old Tibetan nun named Pema knocked on his door. She had traveled down from a mountain retreat, seeking supplies for her nunnery. As was customary, Sonam offered her tea and a place to rest for the night. During their conversation, Pema's gentle questions drew out the story of his repeated business failures and his growing sense of being trapped in an inescapable pattern. Pema listened without judgment, occasionally nodding with understanding that seemed to come from deep experience. When Sonam finished his tale, she sat quietly for several moments before speaking. "Tell me, merchant, in all these partnerships that have failed, what is the one thing that was present in every single situation?" Sonam thought for a moment and then said with bitter recognition, "Me. I was present in every situation." "Exactly," Pema said gently. "And what did you do each time a partnership began to fail?" I tried harder to make them understand my value, to defend my position, to prove that I was being treated unfairly. Pema nodded knowingly. And did that approach ever actually solve the underlying problem? Sonam shook his head slowly, beginning to see where this was leading. The Buddha taught that we cannot escape the consequences of our actions by changing our location. Pema continued with infinite patience. We carry our patterns with us wherever we go because they live not in our circumstances, but in our consciousness. Moving to a new place gives us a temporary reprieve, but unless we transform the inner conditions that create these patterns, they will inevitably resurface like weeds growing from roots left in the soil. Pema helped Sonam understand that his repeated conflicts weren't caused by bad luck or difficult partners, but by a deep-seated belief that he had to fight for recognition and respect. This belief caused him to interpret neutral situations as threats, to respond defensively to harmless comments, and to create the very conflicts he was trying to avoid. Every time you feel unappreciated, she explained, you unconsciously begin acting in ways that make appreciation less likely. You become defensive, demanding, suspicious, and these behaviors push people away, confirming your original fear that you're not valued. But how do I break this pattern? Sonam asked desperately. I've tried to behave differently, to choose better partners, to learn from my mistakes. Nothing seems to work for more than a few months. Pema smiled with infinite compassion. You've been trying to change the outer behavior while leaving the inner belief unchanged. It's like trying to stop a tree from growing bitter fruit by picking the fruit while leaving the bitter roots intact. The belief that you must fight for respect is the root. Until you heal that root, it will keep producing the same bitter fruit, no matter where you plant the tree. Over the following weeks, Pema taught Sonam a practice that seemed almost too simple to be effective. Whenever he noticed himself feeling unappreciated or defensive, he would pause and ask himself, what if this person actually does value me, but I'm interpreting their behavior through the filter of my old fear? Instead of immediately defending himself or demanding recognition, he would experiment with assuming positive intent and responding from curiosity rather than defensiveness. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. Old patterns have deep roots and don't dissolve overnight like sugar in hot tea. But gradually, Sonam began to notice that when he didn't respond defensively to perceived slights, most of them turned out to be misunderstandings rather than actual attacks. When he stopped demanding appreciation, people naturally began to express more gratitude for his contributions. As he became less suspicious of others' motives, they became more open and trusting with him. 6 months later, Sonam entered into a new partnership with a trader named Tenzin. This time, when familiar tensions arose, Sonam didn't flee to a new location or blame his partner. Instead, he recognized the pattern arising and chose to respond differently. When he felt unappreciated, he expressed his needs clearly without attacking Tenzin's character. When disagreements emerged, he listened for understanding rather than just waiting for his turn to defend his position. When success came, he shared credit generously rather than hoarding recognition like a miser hoards gold. For the first time in his adult life, Sonam watched a partnership not only survive its initial challenges, but actually grow stronger through working through conflicts constructively. The pattern that had followed him for decades was finally broken, not through escape or avoidance, but through patient, conscious transformation of the inner conditions that had been creating it. If you're experiencing repeating patterns right now, finding yourself in familiar situations despite your best efforts to grow and change, consider that this might be your consciousness offering you another opportunity to heal something that's been asking for your attention. The fact that the pattern is repeating suggests that you're strong enough now to face it directly rather than continuing to avoid or escape it. Think of a situation in your life that feels frustratingly familiar, perhaps a relationship dynamic, a work conflict, or a personal struggle that seems to follow you, despite your efforts to leave it behind. Instead of focusing on how to escape or fix this pattern, ask yourself, what is this pattern trying to teach me about myself? What old belief or wound might be creating this repetition? Breathe slowly and deeply as you consider the possibility that this pattern isn't your enemy but your teacher. Feel what it would be like to approach this familiar challenge with curiosity rather than frustration, with willingness to learn rather than determination to escape. Each repetition is a chance to practice a new way of being, to strengthen the neural pathways of your preferred response, to prove to yourself that change is possible. Through the repetition of challenging patterns, you're being offered the opportunity to heal wounds that might otherwise remain hidden and unconscious. You're learning that true transformation happens not through escape, but through conscious engagement, not through perfection, but through practice. Like Sonam discovering that his conflicts were invitations to heal his deepest insecurity, you're recognizing that your repeating patterns are doorways to the most profound growth available to your soul. You're standing at the edge of a cliff, and everything inside you wants to step back. But there's nowhere left to retreat. Behind you lies a wasteland of every dream that didn't come true, every person who disappointed you, every hope that turned to ash in your hands. This isn't just another difficult period. This feels like the end of everything you believed about life, love, and the possibility that goodness actually matters. Your friends, if you still have any, offer well-meaning advice that sounds hollow to your ears. Things will get better, they say, but you've heard that promise too many times. Stay positive, they suggest, but positivity feels like a luxury you can no longer afford. You've tried everything: prayer, meditation, therapy, self-help books, positive thinking, and still, the crushing weight of existence presses down on you like a stone that grows heavier each day. What makes this particular darkness so devastating is that it comes not to those who've given up on goodness, but to those who've given everything to it. You're here because you've loved too deeply, tried too hard, believed too completely in the possibility of a just and compassionate world. The people who protect their hearts, who love conditionally, who help others only when it's convenient, they don't face this test because they never invest enough of themselves to reach this breaking point. In the remote mountains of ancient China, there lived a young woman named Mei Lin whose story illuminates why this final test comes only to the most courageous souls. Mei Lin had been the treasured daughter of a prosperous merchant family, surrounded by love and preparing for marriage to her childhood sweetheart, Jiang Wei. Her life was a tapestry of gentle mornings helping her mother in their herb garden, warm afternoons learning calligraphy from her scholarly father, and sweet evenings planning her future with Jiang Wei. She was known throughout their village for her kindness, always the first to help elderly neighbors, to care for sick children, to offer food to traveling beggars. Her heart was so open that people said flowers bloomed brighter in her presence. Then the plague came. Within 6 months, it took her parents, her fiancé, her younger brother, and most of her extended family. The family business collapsed without her father's guidance, leaving Mei Lin not only grief-stricken but also homeless and penniless. At 19, she found herself completely alone in a world that suddenly seemed designed to crush anyone who dared to love. With no relatives willing to take her in and no prospects for survival, Mei Lin walked for days until she reached a remote Buddhist temple nestled high in the mountains. The abbess, Master Lian, welcomed her without question, offering simple robes, a narrow bed, and meals of rice and vegetables. For the first time in months, Mei Lin felt safe enough to truly feel the magnitude of her losses. The grief that poured out of her was so intense that she sometimes forgot to breathe, forgot to eat, forgot that she was supposed to continue existing. But grief wasn't Mei Lin's only challenge. As months passed, a deeper and more insidious poison began to spread through her spirit, the toxic question of whether caring had been her fundamental mistake. If she had loved her family less deeply, their deaths wouldn't have shattered her so completely. If she had protected her heart instead of opening it to everyone she met, she wouldn't be drowning in this ocean of pain. Maybe the people who lived selfishly, who looked out only for themselves, had discovered the secret of avoiding this kind of devastation. One particularly dark winter night, as snow fell silently outside the temple walls, Mei Lin sat in the meditation hall feeling more dead than alive. She was 20 years old and felt like she had already lived 100 years of suffering. The thought that kept circling through her mind was simple and terrifying. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to feel anything ever again. If this is what love leads to, I choose numbness. Master Lian found her there at dawn, curled up like a broken bird on the meditation cushion. Without a word, the elderly abbess sat beside her and began to speak in a voice so gentle it was barely above a whisper. "Child, you look like someone who has reached the end of everything she thought she was. Tell me, what do you see when you look ahead?" "Nothing," Mei Lin replied, her voice hollow as an empty well. "I see nothing worth living for, nothing worth caring about, nothing worth hoping for. Everyone I've ever loved is gone, and all my caring did was make their loss unbearable. I think I want to stop feeling entirely." Master Lian nodded with infinite compassion. "And what do you imagine would happen if you succeeded in stopping all feeling?" Mei Lin considered this. "I suppose I would be safe. I couldn't be hurt anymore. I could just exist without all this pain." The abbess smiled sadly. "Yes, you would be safe. But tell me, would you still be you?" The question hung in the air like incense, slowly filling all the empty spaces in Mei Lin's awareness. She began to realize that her capacity for love, the very thing that was causing her such agony, was also the essence of who she was. To cut away her ability to feel deeply would be to cut away her soul itself. She would survive, but she wouldn't really be alive. There's something you need to understand about this darkness you're experiencing, Master Lian continued. This isn't punishment for loving too much. This is the price of admission to a love so vast that your current heart can't contain it. The person you were, the one who loved beautifully but dependently, who cared deeply but needily, she has to die so that someone capable of infinite love can be born. Mei Lin looked at the abbess with confusion. I don't understand. How can there be a love greater than what I felt for my family? Master Lian pointed to a lotus blossom that somehow managed to bloom in a small pond despite the winter cold. That lotus loves the water, the mud, the sun, and the air equally. It doesn't demand that the water never evaporate or that the sun never set. It loves completely without attachment to permanence. This is the love you're being prepared for, love that doesn't depend on specific outcomes to sustain itself. Over the following months, Master Lian guided Mei Lin through the most counterintuitive practice imaginable. Instead of trying to heal her grief or find meaning in her losses, she learned to sit with the pain without needing it to change. Instead of seeking reasons why tragedy had struck her family, she practiced accepting mystery without demanding explanations. Instead of protecting her heart from future hurt, she slowly opened it again, not to specific people or outcomes, but to life itself in all its terrible beauty. The transformation wasn't quick or comfortable. There were days when Mei Lin felt like she was drowning all over again, nights when the temptation to close her heart felt overwhelming. But gradually, something extraordinary began to emerge from her darkness. She discovered that when she stopped trying to love in order to avoid loss, her capacity for love became limitless. When she released her grip on how love should be returned, her love became unconditional. When she accepted that everything she loved would eventually change or die, her love became fearless. 2 years after arriving at the temple as a broken refugee, Mei Lin had become someone unrecognizable to her former self. She was still capable of deep feeling, but she no longer needed her feelings to conform to her preferences. She could love fully without clinging desperately. She could care completely without controlling compulsively. She had discovered what the Buddha called loving kindness, love that flows like sunlight, touching everything equally without demanding anything in return. When Master Lian eventually asked Mei Lin to leave the temple and return to the world, she felt ready for the first time since her losses. But she wasn't returning as the same person who had fled there in desperation. She was returning as someone who had learned to love the way mountains love the sky, completely, constantly, without fear of storms or changes in weather. The darkness that had nearly destroyed her had actually prepared her for a kind of light that can never be extinguished. This story reveals why the 9th test is actually the greatest gift that life can offer to a pure-hearted soul. When everything you thought you needed for happiness has been stripped away, you discover something shocking. You're still here, still aware, still capable of love. The you that remains when everything else is gone is more resilient, more vast, and more magnificent than anything you lost. In Buddhist understanding, this is called the Great Death, not physical death, but the death of the small self that depends on external circumstances for its well-being. What emerges from this death is what was always present, but hidden beneath layers of attachment, expectation, and need. You discover that you are not your circumstances, not your relationships, not your achievements or failures. You are the aware presence that experiences all of these things, but is touched by none of them. If you're experiencing this test right now, if you feel like you've reached the absolute end of your rope, consider that this might be exactly where you need to be. The darkness you're experiencing isn't evidence that you've been abandoned by the universe. It's evidence that you're being prepared for a role that requires someone who has been tested beyond ordinary limits. Only souls who have lost everything and discovered they haven't lost anything essential are qualified for the work of unconditional love that awaits you. Let's practice sitting in this darkness without trying to escape it. Close your eyes and feel whatever's present: despair, exhaustion, hopelessness, or numbness. Instead of fighting these feelings or trying to transform them, simply be with them as Mei Lin learned to be with her grief. Notice that even in your darkest moments, something is aware of the darkness. This awareness isn't touched by what it observes. It remains clear, present, and somehow mysteriously okay, even when everything else feels terrible. The Buddha taught that suffering ceases not when circumstances change, but when we stop demanding that circumstances be different from what they are. Feel what it would be like to stop fighting your current experience and simply let it be exactly what it is. This isn't giving up. It's the deepest form of courage, the willingness to be present with reality without needing to fix, change, or escape it. The 9th test is revealing its ultimate gift now. You're not being broken by this darkness. You're being broken open to discover the indestructible light that you actually are. Like Mei Lin, emerging from her cocoon of grief as someone capable of fearless love, you're discovering that your greatest losses have been preparing you for your greatest gifts. You are becoming someone who can love without attachment, care without control, hope without demand. You are becoming a beacon for other souls who are walking through their own dark nights, proving by your very existence that dawn always comes to those who wait with patience and trust. The tests are complete now. You have endured everything that could be endured and discovered that you are unbreakable. What remains is not the person who began this journey, but someone infinitely more beautiful, wise, and free. Here you are, having journeyed through the 9 sacred tests that challenge every soul walking the path of goodness. You've witnessed the misunderstanding that comes to those who live authentically, the loneliness of seeing deeper than the surface world, the losses that clear space for greater blessings. You've felt the sting of betrayal by loved ones, faced the darkness of genuine malice, endured the patience required for divine timing. You've navigated the emptiness that precedes awakening, broken free from repeating patterns, and survived the final crucible where everything falls away. But these tests weren't separate challenges happening to you randomly. They were interconnected initiations, each one preparing you for the next, weaving together into a magnificent tapestry of transformation. Every misunderstanding taught you to find validation from within rather than from others. Every loss revealed what was truly essential versus what you only thought you needed. Every betrayal expanded your capacity for unconditional love. Every encounter with darkness strengthened your commitment to light. Think of a master craftsman creating a sword. The metal must be heated in fire, hammered against anvils, folded and refolded countless times, plunged into ice-cold water, then polished until it gleams. Each step seems destructive. The fire burns, the hammer strikes, the cold shocks, the polishing wears away layers. But without these apparent attacks, the metal could never become a blade strong enough to cut through illusion, sharp enough to serve truth, beautiful enough to inspire others. This is what has been happening to your soul through these 9 tests. You haven't been punished for your goodness, you've been refined because of it. Every challenge was precisely calibrated to develop specific qualities that only pure-hearted souls are capable of embodying. The universe doesn't waste such careful cultivation on everyone. These tests come only to those who have the potential to become beacons of hope in a world that desperately needs light. Consider how each test has transformed you in ways that ordinary success never could. Being misunderstood taught you that your worth doesn't depend on others' recognition, a freedom that most people never discover. Feeling isolated in your values showed you how to find connection with the eternal rather than just the temporal. Losing what you thought you needed revealed what you actually are, beyond all possessions and circumstances. Betrayal by loved ones initiated you into a love so pure that it doesn't require reciprocation to sustain itself. Facing genuine malice developed your ability to remain good even when goodness seems to be losing. Delayed success taught you patience and trust in timing that transcends human impatience. Spiritual emptiness pointed you toward what you are beyond all experiences. Repeating patterns gave you opportunities to consciously transform your deepest wounds. The final darkness prepared you to be a light that can never be extinguished. Look at who you've become through these crucibles. You're no longer dependent on external validation because you've found unshakable worth within yourself. You're no longer afraid of being alone because you've discovered your connection to all existence. You're no longer devastated by loss because you know that what you truly are can never be taken away. You're no longer crushed by others' betrayal because your love has become unconditional. You're no longer defeated by malice because your goodness has become diamond strong. You're no longer impatient with timing because you trust the perfect unfolding of your destiny. Most importantly, you've learned the deepest secret of spiritual evolution, that suffering isn't the opposite of blessing, it's the cocoon in which blessings are formed. Every tear you've shed was watering the garden of your soul. Every moment you wanted to give up but didn't was strengthening your spiritual muscles. Every time you chose love over resentment, patience over anger, forgiveness over revenge, you are becoming someone capable of holding and radiating the very qualities this world needs most. The Buddha taught that there are 3 types of people in the world: those who are like letters written in stone, unchanged by any experience; those who are like letters written in sand, easily influenced but quick to forget; and those who are like letters written in water, absorbing every lesson while remaining fluid and open to continuous growth. Through these 9 tests, you've become like water, strong enough to wear away stone over time, gentle enough to nourish everything you touch, clear enough to reflect truth, deep enough to hold mystery. But your transformation isn't complete with the ending of these tests. It's just beginning. You've been prepared for a sacred responsibility that extends far beyond your personal healing. Every soul who has walked this path of refinement becomes a lighthouse for others still navigating stormy seas. Your very existence now serves as proof that goodness doesn't lead to defeat, that patience is rewarded, that love ultimately triumphs over fear. People will be drawn to you without understanding why. They'll sense something different about your presence, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a strength that doesn't need to prove itself, a love that asks for nothing in return. Some will be ready to hear your story and begin their own journey of conscious transformation. Others will simply be comforted by your presence, feeling safer in a world that contains someone who has walked through darkness and emerged with light intact. This is why the tests were so thorough, so challenging, so seemingly endless. The universe needed to be absolutely certain that your light was unshakable before entrusting you with the responsibility of guiding others. Anyone can be kind when life is easy, patient when things go their way, loving when love is returned. But it takes someone who has been tested beyond ordinary limits to remain compassionate in the face of cruelty, peaceful amidst chaos, hopeful in apparent hopelessness. Your daily life now becomes a form of ministry, whether you recognize it or not. The way you respond to small frustrations teaches others about patience. The way you treat difficult people demonstrates the possibility of unconditional love. The way you handle setbacks shows others that resilience is possible. The way you find joy in simple moments reveals that happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances. You've become a living demonstration of truths that most people have only heard about in books or sermons. But perhaps most importantly, you've learned to recognize the tests when they appear in others' lives. When you see someone being misunderstood, despite their good intentions, you know they're in the first test. When you encounter someone feeling isolated by their depth and sensitivity, you understand they're navigating the second test. When you meet someone devastated by unexpected losses, you can offer comfort because you know they're experiencing the third test. Your own journey through the 9 tests has given you a map to help others navigate their own spiritual initiations. This doesn't mean you become a preacher or teacher in the conventional sense. Often, the most powerful guidance you'll offer will be wordless, simply being present with someone in their pain without trying to fix or explain it away. Your calm presence during their storm becomes proof that storms can be weathered. Your continued kindness despite your own wounds shows them that hearts can heal without hardening. Your quiet faith in goodness gives them permission to maintain their own idealism in a cynical world. Sometimes you'll be called to speak directly about what you've learned, sharing your story with someone who needs to hear it. When you do, speak not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has learned to live beautifully with questions. Share not just your insights, but your struggles. Let them see not just your strength, but the vulnerability that made that strength necessary. Help them understand that their pain isn't evidence of spiritual failure, but of spiritual potential waiting to be actualized. Remember that some people aren't ready for the path you've walked. They may prefer easier routes, quicker fixes, or comfortable illusions over the deep transformation that comes through conscious suffering. Don't judge them for this choice. Everyone's soul has its own timing, its own curriculum, its own way of learning what it needs to learn. Your role isn't to convince anyone to walk your path, but simply to walk it so beautifully that those who are ready will be inspired to begin their own journey. As you move forward in your life, you'll find that the 9 tests don't disappear entirely. They may return in gentler forms as opportunities for continued refinement. But you'll meet them now as a master meets familiar exercises, not as a student encounters overwhelming challenges. Each repetition will be an opportunity to demonstrate how much you've grown, to show the universe that your transformation is stable and complete. You'll handle misunderstanding with grace, loss with equanimity, betrayal with compassion, malice with strength tempered by wisdom. Your spiritual practice now becomes less about seeking and more about expressing. Instead of trying to acquire peace, you focus on radiating the peace you've found. Instead of pursuing love, you concentrate on giving the love you've become. Instead of seeking meaning, you dedicate yourself to being meaningful in others' lives. This shift from acquisition to expression marks the transition from student to teacher, from seeker to finder, from someone being shaped by life to someone helping to shape life for others. There will be moments when you look back on your journey through these tests with profound gratitude, even for the most painful experiences. You'll realize that every challenge was perfectly designed to bring out qualities you didn't even know you possessed. Every loss cleared space for something better. Every betrayal taught you about unconditional love. Every moment of darkness made you appreciate light more deeply. You'll understand that if given the choice, you wouldn't change anything about your journey because it made you who you are, and who you are is exactly who the world needs you to be. The ancient alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, but they were really describing what has happened to you. The base metal of your ordinary human concerns has been transformed into the gold of spiritual wisdom through the fire of conscious suffering. You are now a living demonstration of humanity's highest potential, someone who has learned to love without conditions, serve without expecting reward, hope without requiring guarantees, and shine light into darkness simply because that's your nature. As our journey together through these 9 tests comes to a close, know that you carry within you everything you need for whatever comes next. You've been tested and proven. You've been broken and rebuilt stronger. You've been emptied and filled with something imperishable. You've been prepared not just to survive whatever life brings, but to transform it through your presence. Take a moment now to honor how far you've traveled. Feel the strength in your spiritual muscles, the depth of your compassion, the breadth of your understanding. You are no longer the person who began this journey. You've become someone worthy of the ancient title Bodhisattva, one who has achieved liberation but chooses to remain available to help others find their way to freedom. The tests are complete, but the service has just begun. You are ready now to be a blessing in this world, to offer hope to the hopeless, comfort to the suffering, and light to those walking in darkness. This is your graduation, your commissioning, your sacred appointment to carry forward the eternal work of love, transforming the world one heart at a time. Rest now in the deep peace of someone who has endured everything that could be endured and discovered that they are unbreakable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax completely. You have passed through the 9 gates of spiritual initiation. You have earned your place among the wise ones, the strong ones, the eternally loving ones who help hold this world together through their very existence. Whatever tomorrow brings, you will meet it not as someone who might be overwhelmed, but as someone who has already proven they can transform any challenge into wisdom, any wound into compassion, any darkness into light. You are a living miracle, a walking blessing, a breathing prayer of gratitude for the magnificent potential that lives within every human soul. Sleep now, if sleep is what you need, knowing that you are loved beyond measure, cherished beyond words, and trusted by the universe itself to carry its light into the world. The 9 tests are complete. Your real work, the work of being a beacon of hope and love in a world that desperately needs both, begins now. And you are ready.